I still remember the exact weight of that cardboard box in my hands. 11 years of my life, my best years, reduced to a monitorizer, a few framed photos, and a sad little succulent that had survived 3 office moves. Security was standing 2 feet behind me, not because I was dangerous, because that's what Marcus ordered. Marcus, my manager, the man who had just stood in front of 40 people in the all-hands meeting, 40 people I had worked beside for years, and told them that he had built the Meridian platform, that his vision had driven the $47 million in new revenue, that his leadership had saved the company. And I had sat there in the 3rd row and said nothing. Not because I was afraid, not because I was weak, because I already knew what was coming for him. See, while Marcus was up there taking his bow, I had a folder sitting on my personal laptop at home. That folder had 847 files in it. Emails, Slack exports, Git commit histories, meeting notes with timestamps, a legal consultation summary, and the contact information for 3 journalists who covered the enterprise software industry. Marcus thought he had ended my career that morning. What he had actually done was start the clock on his own. If you've ever poured your heart into a job, worked nights, skipped vacations, delivered results that changed the trajectory of a company, this video is for you. Stay with me, because the way this ends is something I still can't fully believe happened. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is where I tell the real stories of corporate America, the politics, the power plays, and yes, sometimes the revenge. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that everything you're about to hear is true. Some details have been changed to protect identities, but the arc of this story, every twist, every betrayal, every moment of reckoning happened exactly as I'm going to describe it. If you've ever been treated unfairly at work, passed over for a promotion you earned, had your ideas stolen, been pushed out by someone who was threatened by you, this one is for you. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this, and make sure notifications are on, because the next one is going to be even wilder. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The year was 2013, and I was 31 years old, sitting across from a recruiter at a mid-size enterprise software company called Caldwell Systems. Caldwell wasn't a household name. They made back-end infrastructure tools for mid-market logistics companies, the kind of software that nobody thinks about until it breaks, and then everyone panics. But they were profitable, they were growing, and the recruiter had used the phrase ground floor opportunity enough times that I was genuinely excited. I'd spent my late 20s grinding through 2 smaller companies, building my skills as a product developer and systems architect. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the guy who gave the TED Talk at the company retreat, but I could ship. The role was senior product developer, reporting to the director of product development. The salary was a meaningful step up. The equity package was modest but real. I said yes. My first week, I met Marcus. Let me describe Marcus for you, because understanding him is important to understanding everything that follows. Marcus Hale was 44 years old, trim, perpetually tan in a way that suggested either frequent vacations or a very good spray tan place. He had the kind of confidence that fills a room before he even speaks, the shoulders back, eye contact before you want it energy of a man who had learned early that charisma was a career tool. He was my manager, and in that first week, he was genuinely impressive. He knew everyone's name, he remembered details from conversations weeks later. He could read a room better than almost anyone I'd ever met. In our first one-on-one, he leaned forward, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "I invest in the people on my team. If you do good work, I will fight for you." I believed him. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand, I wasn't naive. I'd had difficult managers before. I'd navigated office politics. I knew how to protect myself professionally. But Marcus was skilled. He was the kind of person who could walk you right up to the edge of a cliff while making you feel like you were on a scenic hike.
The first warning sign came about 3 months in. We were in a product review meeting with our VP, a woman named Sandra. I had put together a proposal for a new integration framework, something that would dramatically reduce the time it took to onboard new clients onto our platform. I'd spent 2 weekends building the prototype and writing the documentation. In the meeting, I walked through the proposal. Sandra asked a few questions. Marcus sat quietly at the end of the table, nodding. After the meeting, Sandra pulled Marcus aside in the hallway. I was maybe 10 feet away, packing up my laptop. I heard her say, "That integration framework is really sharp. Good thinking." And Marcus said, "Thanks, Sandra. My team is really delivering." My team. Not my name. Not David had a great idea. Just his team. I told myself it was nothing. Managers get credit for their team's work. That's just how it works. I filed it away and moved on. But I started paying attention differently after that.
Over the next year, I watched a pattern develop. Every time one of my ideas was well received in a meeting Marcus attended, the credit migrated upward from me to the team to we to eventually just Marcus's judgment and vision. Every time something went wrong, the attribution was precise and personal. David's timeline slipped. David's estimates were off. Meanwhile, Marcus was cultivating his reputation upstairs, almost surgical precision. He had lunch with the VP of Sales once a week. He was on the executive briefing schedule every quarter. He was the kind of manager who always seemed to be in exactly the right conversation at exactly the right time. I watched this, I noted it, and I kept working. Because here's the thing about me. I am not the person who quits when things get hard. I am the person who doubles down. I had a team that I genuinely liked. I had problems I genuinely wanted to solve. And I told myself, wrongly as it turned out, that results were ultimately what mattered. By 2015, I had been at Caldwell for 2 years. I delivered 3 major projects, all on time, all under budget. My team had grown from 4 people to 9, and I had started to develop what would eventually become the Meridian platform. The genesis of Meridian is important, so let me explain it clearly. Caldwell's biggest pain point was client integration time. Onboarding a new logistics customer onto our platform took, on average, 18 weeks. That sounds insane, and it was. Every new client was essentially a custom implementation. Different data schemas, different API structures, different legacy systems on their end. We were rebuilding the wheel every single time. I spent about 3 months doing research. I interviewed every implementation engineer we had. I pulled the postmortems from the last 20 client onboardings. I analyzed where the time actually went, and I came to a conclusion that seemed obvious in retrospect, but that nobody had actually articulated. 90% of what we were rebuilding from scratch each time was variations on the same 6 core data transformation problems. If we could build a flexible, configurable middleware layer that solved those 6 problems in a composable way, something clients and implementation teams could customize without engineering intervention, we could cut onboarding time from 18 weeks to maybe 4 or 5. I wrote a 12-page technical proposal and a 3-page executive summary. I brought it to Marcus. He read it for about 10 minutes. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "I like it. It's ambitious. Let me think about the best way to position this upstairs." I said, "Should I be in that conversation?" He said, "Let me handle the introduction. You know how Sandra is. She needs to hear it from me first before she'll take a meeting." I accepted that. I shouldn't have. What I didn't know then, but would learn later, was that Marcus had scheduled a meeting with Sandra the very next morning, without me. And in that meeting, he had presented my 12-page proposal as something he'd been developing. Sandra green-lit it immediately. When Marcus came back to me, he said, "Great news. I got approval. We're moving forward. I'll need you to lead the technical execution." He presented it as a favor. I received it as one.
And so I began building Meridian. In early 2016, Sandra Cho left the company. She took a C-suite role at a competitor and was out in 6 weeks. The new VP of product was a man named Richard Voss, brought in from outside, hungry to make his mark fast. Richard didn't know the history of any projects. He only knew what people told him. And the first person who got to Richard was Marcus. From the outside, nothing looked different. I was still running the Meridian project, my team was still shipping, but I noticed that the monthly product reviews, where I had always presented directly, started to shift. Marcus began introducing context before I spoke. Then he started summarizing after I finished. Then, slowly, he started presenting the slides himself while I sat in the room like a supporting character. I raised it with him directly. I said, "Marcus, I feel like I'm getting cut out of the Richard relationship. I'd like to present Meridian myself." He smiled. He said, "Totally understand. I'm just trying to make sure Richard gets the big picture first. You know how technical the details get. I'm actually doing this to protect you." That word, protect. I've thought about it 1,000 times since. It's the word manipulators use when they want you to feel grateful for something they're taking from you. I let it go. I went back to work. By mid-2017, Meridian was in beta with 3 pilot clients. The results were stunning. Average onboarding time had dropped from 18 weeks to 6. We were still refining. We hadn't hit our target of 4 weeks yet. But client satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. The VP of Sales was calling it a game changer. I was proud, genuinely, deeply proud. And I was starting to get nervous because I could feel something shifting, the way you can feel a weather change before you see it. January 2018, Meridian went fully live with 10 clients simultaneously. The results in that first quarter were extraordinary. Revenue from new client acquisitions, directly attributable to faster, cheaper onboarding enabled by Meridian, came in at $12.4 million for the quarter alone. The company's stock price, which had been flat for 3 years, jumped 14% in 6 weeks. The board noticed, the CEO noticed, the trade press noticed. And in April of that year, at Caldwell's annual company summit, the big all-hands event where they brought in the whole company, did the rah-rah presentations, gave out awards, Richard Voss took the stage and announced that the Meridian platform had generated $31 million in incremental revenue in its first year of operation. The room went electric. Then Richard said, "And none of this would have happened without the vision and leadership of one person. Marcus, come up here." I was sitting in the 3rd row. Marcus walked up to the stage. He shook Richard's hand. He accepted a crystal award with the company logo on it. He turned to the audience with his practiced warm smile and said, "Thank you. I'm proud of what we've built, and I'm proud of the team that trusted my vision." His vision. I sat very still. Around me, people were applauding. A few of my team members, people who had worked nights and weekends with me for 3 years, looked over at me. The looks on their faces were complicated. Some of them were angry on my behalf. Some of them were confused. A couple of them looked away quickly, like they were afraid to make eye contact. I didn't clap. I sat there, and I made a decision. I decided in that moment that I was not going to blow up. I was not going to march to the stage and cause a scene. I was not going to go to HR that afternoon in a white-hot rage, because I had been around long enough to know that the person who erupts publicly is always the one who loses, regardless of who's right. I was going to be calm. I was going to be methodical, and I was going to document everything. But before I could execute that plan, Marcus moved first. 3 weeks after the summit, I was called into a meeting with Marcus and an HR business partner named Joyce. I had not been told what the meeting was about. When I arrived, both of them were already seated, and there was a printed document on the table in front of them. Joyce said, "We want to talk with you about some concerns that have been raised." I said, "What concerns?" Marcus said, "Several members of the team have expressed discomfort with your communication style.
There have been complaints about aggressive behavior in meetings and an unwillingness to collaborate. I want you to hear what I heard in that moment. I had been at this company for 5 years. I had delivered one of the most successful projects in company history. And 3 weeks after my manager took public credit for my work, I was sitting across from HR being told I was aggressive and uncollaborative. I said, very calmly, I'd like to know specifically who made these complaints and what specific behaviors are being described. Joyce said, we're not able to share that information. Marcus said, we just want to give you the opportunity to reflect and make some adjustments. I said, is this being formally documented? Joyce said, it's a verbal coaching conversation at this stage. I said, I'd like to have anything discussed today confirmed in writing. They both looked slightly uncomfortable. Joyce made a note. I walked out of that meeting knowing exactly what was happening. This was the setup. This was Marcus, or Marcus and Richard, or all three of them, creating a paper trail to manage me out before I became a problem. I drove home that night and I did not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running the calculus of my situation. I had no HR documentation in my favor. I had no formal record of my contributions to Meridian. I had no proof yet that Marcus had misrepresented the origins of the project. What I had was a very clear understanding of what was happening, a 5-year memory, and access to my own sent mail folder. I got up at 2 a.m. and started working. Over the following weeks, things at work deteriorated in ways both obvious and subtle.
My one-on-ones with Marcus were moved from weekly to bi-weekly, then became irregular. I stopped being included in key product strategy meetings. New initiatives that would have naturally fallen under my scope were assigned to other team members. When I asked questions in meetings, Marcus had a new habit of gently redirecting or slightly dismissing, not enough to be obviously hostile, but enough to signal to the room that my input was less valued. My team felt it too. 2 of my best engineers came to me separately within the same week, both saying versions of the same thing. Something feels off. Is everything okay? I told them I was handling it. I tried to believe that was true. The second HR meeting came 6 weeks later. This time there was a written document, a performance improvement plan. 3 vague areas of concern, no specific incidents with dates, no names of complainants, a 90-day timeline with review milestones. A PIP. If you don't know what that is, a performance improvement plan sounds supportive. In practice, in most corporate environments, it is the formal mechanism for building the documentation needed to terminate someone. Very few people who receive a PIP survive it. Most are gone within the 90 days. I read every word. Then I looked at Joyce and said, I'd like to respond to this in writing within 5 business days. She said that was fine. I said, I also want to note for the record that this PIP comes 6 weeks after I was absent for public recognition for a project I built. I want that noted. Joyce's pen stopped moving. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. For the first time, I saw it, the faintest flicker of something that wasn't quite confidence. That flicker told me everything I needed to know. He was nervous. And then something happened that changed everything. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into my PIP period, I got a LinkedIn message from someone named Priya Sharma. I didn't recognize the name. The message said, Hi, you don't know me, but I worked at Caldwell from 2011 to 2014. I left before you probably joined. I've been following the Meridian news. There's something you should know. Can we talk? I stared at that message for a long time. My first instinct was caution. Corporate situations can involve plants, people sent to probe you or extract information. But something about the message felt genuine. The specificity of the dates,
The phrase, "there's something you should know," it wasn't fishing. It felt like someone who had been carrying something and finally decided to put it down. I messaged back and suggested a phone call.
What Priya told me changed the entire shape of what I thought I was dealing with. She said that back in 2013, before I joined, Marcus had done the same thing to her. She had been a senior product manager who developed a client onboarding methodology that had saved the company hundreds of thousands in implementation costs. Marcus had presented it to leadership as his own framework. When she pushed back, she was given a PIP within 2 months. She left before it concluded, took a settlement with an NDA, and moved on with her career. She said she'd been watching from the outside as the Meridian story grew. She'd read the trade press coverage, she'd seen Marcus's name on everything, and she said, "I know what he does, I know the pattern. I wanted someone to finally beat him." I asked her if she could help me. She said, "I can't, my NDA is still active, but I can tell you, look for the things he can't explain. Look for the technical decisions, the things that require the kind of domain knowledge he doesn't have. Get the commit logs, get the early design documents, get anything with a timestamp that predates his involvement." I said, "What about you? Is there anything?" She said, "I have a very good lawyer, and she told me my NDA doesn't prevent me from responding to a legal subpoena." She let that land. Then she said goodbye and wished me luck. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building for 45 minutes after that call. Then I went upstairs and got to work. Let me tell you something about documentation that most people don't understand until they need it. The instinct when you're being wronged is to immediately tell someone, your spouse, your best friend, your coworkers, HR, whoever will listen. And the emotion driving that instinct is real and valid. You need to be heard. You need support. You need someone to acknowledge that what's happening to you is not okay. But professionally, emotional venting in all directions is one of the most dangerous things you can do. It gives the other side a picture of your state of mind. It can compromise witnesses. It can make you look unstable. And it can tip off the people who are trying to manage you out that you're building a case. So before I did anything else, I made myself 2 rules. Rule 1, nothing leaves my mouth at work that I'm not comfortable reading back in a deposition. Rule 2, everything goes in the folder.
The folder. Let me tell you about the folder. I had started, after the summit, making digital copies of everything I could legitimately access and retain. Emails I had sent and received, Slack messages I had participated in. I took screenshots, dated and organized. Meeting invites with attendee lists, shared documents with version histories showing my edits. Git commit logs from the Meridian codebase, every commit time-stamped, attributed to my username. Here's something non-technical people don't always appreciate. Software code lives in version control systems. Every change to the code is logged with the author's name, the time, and a description of what changed. The Meridian platform had thousands of commits in its history. My username was on the majority of them. That history doesn't lie, and it's very, very hard to alter retroactively without leaving traces. I also started keeping a contemporaneous journal. Every workday before bed, I wrote down what had happened, meetings I attended, conversations I had, decisions that were made, anything I noticed, dated entries. No emotion, no editorializing, just facts. That kind of log, if it's consistent and detailed, carries real weight. And I called a lawyer. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. If you believe you are being set up for wrongful termination, discriminated against, or subjected to retaliation, talk to an employment attorney before you need one. Most employment attorneys offer free or low-cost initial consultations.
The conversation I had with mine, which cost me $300 for an hour of her time, reframed everything. Her name was Catherine, and she was the kind of lawyer who speaks very slowly and very precisely because she has learned that clients in distress need to hear things clearly. She told me 3 things in our first meeting. First, a PIP issued without documentation of specific behaviors, without dates, without witnesses, and in close temporal proximity to a protected complaint or activity, is potentially actionable as pretextual termination. Second, credit theft, in a context where it causes quantifiable financial harm to the victim, lost bonuses, lost promotions, lost equity grants, can form the basis of a wage and hour claim depending on state law and the specific facts. Third, if I was going to build a case, I needed to stop doing anything at work that could be characterized as performance problems, insubordination, or hostility. I needed to be the best, most cooperative, most documented employee in the history of that company for the remainder of my time there. I walked out of her office with a legal pad full of notes and a plan. Back at the office, I executed. I responded to the PIP in writing with a 5-page document. I didn't attack Marcus in it. I didn't make accusations. I simply, point by point, addressed each vague performance area with specific, documented counter-evidence. For the aggressive communication complaint, I provided a summary of my communication patterns, offered to review any specific instances HR could identify, and noted that I had received no negative feedback of this kind in my annual reviews over 5 years. I asked Joyce in writing to confirm whether the complaints had been investigated per company policy and whether I had been given the opportunity to respond before the PIP was issued. She responded vaguely. I documented the response. Then I requested a meeting with Richard Voss.
Marcus tried to intercept it. He emailed me saying he thought it was premature to escalate to Richard and that we should work through things as a team. I responded in writing, copying Joyce, which I knew would make Marcus uncomfortable, that I appreciated his perspective and was simply following the escalation process outlined in the employee handbook. Richard agreed to meet with me. In that meeting, I didn't mention Marcus by name. I said I wanted to discuss the Meridian project timeline and my role in it. Specifically, I wanted to ensure that my contributions were accurately reflected in any internal documentation, because I was concerned about how the transition of credit could affect my performance record. Richard looked mildly uncomfortable. He said he understood my contributions had been significant. I said, I'd like that in writing, if possible. Specifically, I'd like to be acknowledged as the originating architect and technical lead of the Meridian platform. He said he'd think about it. I said, I appreciate that. I should mention that I've been in touch with legal counsel regarding the current performance review process, just so you're aware of where things stand. The room changed when I said that. Richard's demeanor shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, but was completely clear to me. His jaw tightened slightly. He glanced at his desk. He said, Of course, I appreciate you being direct. I thanked him and left. That afternoon, Marcus called me into his office. He closed the door. He didn't sit down. He stood with his arms crossed and said, What exactly did you say to Richard? I said, I had a professional conversation about project attribution and my performance review. He said, You mentioned lawyers. I said, I mentioned I was in touch with counsel, yes. He said, That's not a great look, David. I said, Marcus, I'm going to ask you to put any concerns you have in writing and send them to me and Joyce. I'm trying to ensure that all of our communications are documented going forward. His expression was very controlled, but his jaw was tight. I said, Is there anything else? He said nothing. I left. And then something happened that changed everything.
4 weeks before my 90-day PIP concluded, I was at a regional industry conference when I ran into someone from my early career. Her name was Diane Lester. We had worked together at my first job almost a decade earlier. She was now a VP of product at a competitor, a company called Nexara Systems, which was Caldwell's most direct rival in the mid-market logistics space. We had dinner. We caught up. At the end of the evening, she said, "I'm going to be direct with you. We've been following Meridian from the outside, and our CTO thinks whoever built it is one of the smartest product architects in the industry. Is that you?" I said, "It is." She said, "Are you happy at Caldwell?" I said, "I'm in an interesting situation at the moment." She handed me her card and said, "Call me." I want to be transparent about something here. I didn't contact Nexara because I was certain I would lose at Caldwell. I contacted them because Catherine had told me something I hadn't expected, that the strongest position in a wrongful termination or retaliation situation is when the victim has options. When you're negotiating from desperation, you take bad deals. When you're negotiating with a job offer in hand, the math changes entirely. I called Diane.
2 weeks later, I had a verbal offer for a VP of Product Engineering role at Nexara, a title 2 levels above my current role, with a base salary 40% higher than what I was earning. I hadn't accepted yet. I was holding it. Now I had a decision to make, and I needed to make it carefully, because something else had happened in those 2 weeks that I haven't told you about yet. One of my engineers, a guy named Tomas, who had been on the Meridian project since the beginning and who I trusted completely, came to me after hours. He sat down in my office, looked around, and said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I don't know if it's useful, but I can't not tell you." He told me that at a team lunch, Marcus had made a comment to a group of junior engineers about the Meridian project. He'd said something to the effect of, "David was a good executor, but the architecture was always mine. Sometimes you need to let the technical guys think it's their idea." 3 people had heard it. Tomas had written it down immediately afterward because it had bothered him. He showed me the note. It was time-stamped. He'd sent himself an email. I thanked him. I told him I might need to call on him later. He said, "Whatever you need, what he's doing to you isn't right." I now had contemporaneous documentation of my technical contributions, the Priya Sharma conversation and her implied testimony availability, an off-the-record admission from Marcus witnessed by 3 people, a job offer in hand, and a lawyer who had been building a case for 2 months. What I did not have was patience, but I forced myself to be patient for 12 more days. On day 88 of my 90-day PIP, Marcus and Joyce called me in and told me that I had not met the terms of the improvement plan and that my employment was being terminated effective immediately. I was walked out of the building with a cardboard box and a security escort. I didn't argue, I didn't make a scene. I shook Joyce's hand. I actually shook her hand, and I said, "Please ensure I receive all termination documentation in writing within 3 business days per state law." Joyce looked surprised by how calm I was. As I walked through the lobby, I passed the glass-walled conference room where the company's quarterly planning session was in progress. I could see Richard at the head of the table. I could see Marcus seated to his left, already looking at something on his laptop. I didn't stop. I walked out the front door, put the box in my car, and drove home. That afternoon, I called Catherine. She said, "Good, now we go."
Here is what the next 8 months looked like. Catherine filed a formal demand letter 2 weeks after my termination. It outlined 3 claims: wrongful termination in retaliation for protected legal activity, constructive fraud related to the misappropriation of intellectual property and the resulting financial harm to me in the form of lost bonuses and equity, and defamation related to the false performance complaints that had no basis in documented fact. The demand letter requested full severance of 18 months of pay, correction of my employment record, written acknowledgement of my role as the originating architect of the Meridian platform,
and a reference letter from the company. Caldwell's general counsel responded within a week, which was faster than Catherine expected, and told us they were nervous. They proposed a negotiation. Catherine told them we were open to negotiation and sent over our initial document package, which was substantial. The Git logs, the email archives, the version history of the original 12-page proposal, the time-stamped meeting notes, Tomas's email to himself, 2 other written statements from team members who had been present during Marcus's comment at the lunch, my performance reviews from years 1 through 4, all of which were positive, the complete absence of any documented performance concern prior to the 6 weeks after the awards summit. And this is the part I haven't told you yet, and I need you to hear it, because this was the plot twist I hadn't even known was coming. Catherine, during her discovery preparation, had requested the bonus documentation from the period of Meridian's launch. Caldwell's legal team had to disclose it, and in that documentation was something that reframed everything. Marcus had received a $340,000 bonus in the fiscal year following Meridian's launch. The bonus was specifically described in the internal documentation as a leadership performance award tied to the Meridian platform's revenue impact. But here's what nobody knew, what I didn't know until Catherine found it. Marcus had filed an internal invention disclosure form with the company. An invention disclosure form is a standard corporate document where employees formally claim credit for innovations in order to establish IP ownership and eligibility for certain bonus structures. Marcus had filed one for Meridian. He had signed it. He had certified under penalty of perjury that he was the originating inventor of the platform's core architecture. He had signed a legal document under penalty of perjury, claiming my work was his. That is not a performance issue. That is not a political maneuvering problem. That is potentially criminal fraud. Catherine had a new conversation with Caldwell's general counsel that was considerably different in tone from the first. She said, and I was on the call, "You need to understand that we are now looking at a signed fraud document that your client's employee filed, claiming sole inventorship of a platform that generated $47 million in documented revenue, which directly tied to a $340,000 bonus payment. That is wire fraud adjacent. That is potentially criminal. The question you need to answer for your clients is whether they want to litigate this or resolve it." There was a very long silence. Then the general counsel said he needed to consult with his clients. He called back in 4 days.
What happened next unfolded over 3 months of negotiations, and I am going to tell you the broad strokes because the specific numbers are under a confidentiality agreement. But I will tell you what I'm allowed to tell you. 1. I received a settlement that was significantly larger than my initial demand, more than I asked for, because once they saw the invention disclosure document and Catherine explained the full scope of their exposure, they wanted this resolved quietly and completely. 2. My employment record was formally corrected. My personnel file now contains a letter confirming my role as the originating technical architect and project lead for the Meridian platform. 3. Richard Voss personally signed a reference letter. I have it. It is specific, detailed, and glowing. 4. Marcus Hale was terminated from Caldwell Systems within 60 days of the settlement. I was not told this directly. The settlement explicitly prohibited them from telling me, but Tomas called me from his personal phone 3 months after I left and told me Marcus was gone. He said the official reason given internally was restructuring. Nobody believed it. 5, and this is the part I didn't see coming, even after everything. Priya Sharma. Remember Priya? The woman who called me out of nowhere, who said she couldn't help but whose lawyer had mentioned subpoenas? She was contacted by Caldwell's attorneys as part of their internal investigation following my settlement. Her NDA, according to her lawyer, did not cover a material corporate fraud investigation. She was interviewed. I don't know exactly what she told them, but Tomas told me that HR had been meeting with people across multiple departments for weeks. Whatever Priya said in that interview, combined with whatever Caldwell's internal investigation found, resulted in something that Priya texted me about several months later. She had gotten my number through a mutual contact. She said, "They retroactively issued me a revised settlement. I can't share details, but I wanted you to know. It's done." She added one more line. "Thank you for finishing it." I sat with that text for a long time. Meanwhile, I had accepted the role at Nexera. I was a VP of Product Engineering. I had a team of 22 people. I was well compensated. I had equity that actually had the potential to be worth something. And I was building things again. Within 14 months of joining Nexera, we launched a next-generation integration platform that made Meridian look like a rough draft. It was built on everything I had learned, every mistake, every constraint, every "I wish we had done this differently." The Nexera platform was more flexible, faster to deploy, and built from the ground up for enterprise scale. It worked exceptionally well. At Nexera's annual conference 18 months after I joined, the CEO stood on a stage and talked about our integration platform's market impact. He said it had contributed to $89 million in new revenue in its first year. He said it had won 3 industry awards. He said it was redefining the standard for enterprise logistics software. And then he said, "None of this exists without the vision and execution of our VP of Product Engineering." He said my name. I walked onto that stage, I shook the CEO's hand, I took the award, and I turned to the audience. I said, "Thank you. I want to acknowledge my entire team. Every single one of you built this. I'm proud to be here with you." And then I sat back down.
And then something happened that changed everything one last time. 3 weeks after that conference, I received a call from a journalist at an enterprise publication. She had been covering enterprise software for 15 years. She said she was doing a piece on the evolution of the logistics software market, and she was tracing the lineage of several platform architectures, including Meridian and our Nexera platform. She said she had done some research. She said there were some interesting questions about the origins of Meridian that she was exploring. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak on the record. I called Catherine. Catherine said, "You can speak. Your settlement prohibits you from disparaging Caldwell, but it does not prohibit you from truthfully describing your own work and your own career." I spoke to the journalist. I told my story, carefully, factually, without editorializing about Marcus or Caldwell by name. I talked about what I built. I talked about what I learned. I talked about why I left. The article ran 6 weeks later. It described the development of Meridian accurately, based on publicly available Git records and technical documentation, and identified me as the architect who had created its foundational concepts. Marcus was not mentioned. Within 72 hours of publication, the article had been shared thousands of times on LinkedIn. My profile views went up 800%. I received 14 inbound recruiting messages, 5 speaking invitations, and 3 requests for advisory conversations, and 1 email from someone I didn't recognize with a Caldwell email address. It said simply, "Thank you for having the courage to survive. We all knew the truth." I don't know who sent it. They didn't sign it. The account bounced when I tried to reply. I still have that email. It's in the folder.
I've thought a lot about what to take away from this experience. Not just for myself. I've processed it fairly thoroughly, with time and a very good therapist, but for you. Because if you've watched this far, you probably recognize something in this story. Maybe it was a Marcus in your own life. Maybe it was the sinking feeling in your stomach at the awards meeting. Maybe it was the cardboard box. So let me leave you with what I actually learned. Not platitudes, but the real tactical and emotional lessons that I carry with me now. Lesson 1. Document before you need to.
From your first day at any job, create a simple practice. Save any communication where you take credit for something, where you make a decision, where you deliver results. Keep it in a personal folder on a personal device. You hope you never need it, but if you do, it will be the most valuable thing you own. Lesson 2. HR exists to protect the company, not you. I know that sounds cynical. It's not meant to be. HR professionals are often good people doing a difficult job, but their institutional mandate is to manage the company's legal exposure, not to be your advocate. Understand that going into every HR interaction. Be professional, be cooperative, be documented, but never mistake HR for your ally. Lesson 3. Get a lawyer before you think you need one. $300 for an initial consultation with an employment attorney can tell you whether what's happening to you is just unpleasant or potentially actionable. It reframes everything. Most people who are being pushed out don't realize they have options because they don't have that information. Get the information. Lesson 4. Your best revenge is building something undeniably great. When I joined Nexera, I wasn't trying to get back at Caldwell. I was trying to build something I was proud of. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was a byproduct of the work. It always is. The people who try to engineer their revenge as a primary goal usually get consumed by it. Build. The scoreboard takes care of itself. Lesson 5. You are not as alone as they want you to feel. Marcus's playbook, and it is a playbook used by managers like him in offices around the world, depends on isolation. The goal is to make you feel like no one sees it, no one will speak up, no one can help. Priya Sharma proved that wrong. Tomas proved that wrong. The anonymous Caldwell employee who emailed me proved it wrong. There are almost always people who see the truth. Sometimes you just have to give them a reason to say something. I'm not going to tell you that everything worked out perfectly. My 5 years at Caldwell were years I can't get back. The stress of that period cost me in ways that don't show up in a settlement agreement. Relationships strained, sleep lost, health affected. That's real, and I want to name it. But I'm sitting here now building things I'm proud of, with my name on them, with a team that I genuinely love, in a role that reflects what I'm actually capable of. And Marcus Hale is on LinkedIn, listing himself as the creator of the Meridian platform in his profile summary. He can have that sentence on LinkedIn. I have the Git logs. If you've ever been wronged at work, passed over, pushed out, had your work stolen, been made to feel like you didn't matter, I want you to know that your instinct that something is wrong is almost certainly right. Trust it, document it, get help, and keep building. This one's for you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced something like this? What happened? What did you do? The community here is real, and your story matters. If this video helped you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find it. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with anyone who needs to hear that they're not alone. I'll see you in the next one.